The following episode of Friends Talking Nerdy will discuss some pretty heavy topics, including suicide and gun violence. Listener discretion is advised. You're listening to the Friends Talking Nerdy Podcast Network.
Friends Talking Nerdy. If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends Talking Nerdy.
And welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. This is Tim the Nerd on a very blustery, wintry day with over 4 inches of snow outside the window here. Right across the table from me, I have Her Holiness, the Reverend Tracy. How's your week been?
Oh, my week's been shit. There's some stuff that's happened that I will probably mention at the front of the next show, not today, because I don't want to basically trauma dump on our listeners, because it has been. You can probably verbally be like, indeed, it has been, the Reverend. It's been a really hard week. But yeah, looking out, it's nice that we can have the window open today and not worry about the squirrels, because I think so far we're sitting at least 4 or 5 inches of snow. So the Mr. Reverend and I are really kind of hoping this means we can go skiing and maybe blow off some steam. But unfortunately, I come to the show bearing some bad news. And maybe if we want to play a snippet of what we'd played before, we can at the front of this. I don't know. We didn't discuss it before we started recording. But some of you may remember that I had gotten a really cool, heartfelt thank you from one of the haunters I hired this year. Her name was Kara. And yeah, got totally blindsided with the fact that I guess she passed very unexpectedly this last week. So we're recording this on Friday a little bit later because I had told Tim I need some space for the epically shitty week I had this week. And that being a big part of that. But absolutely wonderful human. She had always wanted to work for a haunted house. So in a way, I'm very honored that we got to help her live a dream. In that sense. She had mentioned applying for other ones and not being accepted for, I won't say for what reasons, I don't really know, right? I'm not their casting director, but I looked at her and saw a lot of passion and a lot of want to be there and said, yes, let's bring this human to be one of our monsters this season. And just to share something light, I'm one of those people that I do like to focus on the good memories, as soon as I can. And I think the best memory I have with her this season was, I was the casting director, my co-director mostly led the breaks on one side of the haunt, and I led the clown side. So she was one of my clowns. And this person happened to be in a wheelchair. And so getting her in and out for breaks took a little bit of creativity. And there was a queue of patrons, because we always break it up. That way they know for sure there are 2 separate haunts. It's because of feedback we've gotten in prior years of, where's the second haunt? So we had a second queue of people, so you have to go through them. And so I'd give her my clown horn, and she would just laugh maniacally as I just sang, "Send in the clowns," weaving around like crazy through people. And it's funny because it honestly unglued some folks, and that made her love it even more. So, yeah, lost one of the good ones. Very, very sweet person. Fun fact that I will totally throw out there, she was on an episode of Portlandia, season 6, episode 6. She is I think she was blonde when I had looked it up before, but she's up in the front and she's being very nonverbal. She was really funny because it was Fred Armisen and the girl, I forget her actual name and her character name, because they changed character names a lot because of the skiddiness of that show. But he was in crutches and they had gone into this meeting where there's handicapped people and trying to say, we need all these rights and all this stuff. And so it's them basically rolling their eyes at these 2 ridiculous humans that had come into their meeting. So watching that brought a little bit of joy to me this week as well. So I guess to put it out there, Kara, you will be missed. You're an absolute joy. And then, of course, I intend on sending a reach out to all of the Fearlandian family to let them know and so they can be involved. I think they're going to try to do something in March. So we're hoping we can send something nice just to give our condolences to the family.
Nice. Yeah, I met her did have like one very brief interaction with her, but it's a shock of all shocks. Me, I guess I wasn't too social.
Well, you were also on the opposite side, and she'd come in late because she also did like a lot of her own makeup, and she'd do her own thing. So she, like I said, I really liked her a lot. She definitely had left a memory. I didn't have to struggle at all to remember who she was.
Yeah, and I think most important, too, she was one of the people that always had a positive attitude in terms of being happy, and especially in a creative situation like that, and you got a group of people committed to performing one task. You need people like that. You don't need a group of me's.
You have to have that balance, though, right? But yeah, you guys were... You kind of notice that, too, like any time, even my first season at Fearlandia, when I worked one side of the haunt, I very rarely interacted with whoever was in the other haunt, and it was just because of how it was. You're basically in two different attractions. So it's like, working the tilt-a-whirl and not knowing the person that runs, like, the dart throwing game, like the balloon pop game or ring toss or something at the carnival, right? Like, you might not ever interact with each other. But yeah, no, she was a very, very sweet person. She even acted as... she helped with the audio when we did the Time Warp video. So she was over there helping hold so that we had something to listen to.
That's right. I gave her my phone.
Yeah, there you go. See, she used your phone, Tim.
Yeah.
So she helped play like the Time Warp for us while we did that video because, being in a wheelchair, she knew she couldn't be in it, but she wanted to help. And that's just, that was her to a core. She was very helpful, very sweet person. And I know she will be dearly missed. And my heart goes out to her parents who are very much still trying to just accept that this has happened, right? Because it wasn't, like I said, it was quite abrupt. So
yeah, we definitely send out our thoughts to her family in this sad time, and when anytime you have someone significant in your life pass away, I mean, I think back to what Dr. McCoy said at the end of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, after Spock died in the movie, and that was, he's not really dead so long as we remember him.
Exactly.
And I think, with that mindset, that's made death a lot easier to handle, for me at least.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, too, it's like the idea of like... So the Mr. Reverend and I, through other things that happened this week, decided to binge Valhalla Season 2. And at the very end, there is a character who gets killed. And, they're going on about how they will be recognized as a martyr or whatever. And, the person who did the killing said, "But who is around to tell your story?" And it kind of led to this interesting discussion between the Mr. Reverend and myself about as long as the memories are shared, the person doesn't go anywhere. And that's even stuff like whenever we talk about, his late brother who passed away, there's this one human that was in his life that, oh my God, I hope there's a heaven and that I get the pass like St. Francis says I should. Just if she's there to get to meet her, because it was like his great-grandmother, which not a lot of people even know their great-grandmother, but some of the stories that he tells, in that way, the person gets to live on. So, but yeah, so sad news. I would like to couple it with some good news for people who are following the journey of the baby Reverend. We did have another ultrasound. He's doing great. He really loves keeping his feet by his head, which is really weird. And I think he just got them unstuck where they're down by his butt again. So if anybody hears any giggling from me, just understand that it tickles when he gets his feet back and decides to start kicking. But the cool thing we got to capture that you don't always get to see is practice breathing. That was kind of neat to get to watch because it's not something that they technically try to get. They just happen to get it sometimes, and so they were able to record that, and that was kind of neat.
Yes, if the Reverend is laughing, it has nothing to do with what I say. I mean, we have over 290 episodes now to prove that.
There's proof that I don't think Tim the Nerd is funny. We have lots of documented evidence there. No, so it could be, if it seems out of place or if we share something really sad and you hear the Reverend giggle, I promise it's just bad timing from my son.
Yeah, we'll have a discussion about Anne Frank and all of a sudden, ha! No. Anyway. Well, for me, been kind of an introspective couple weeks for me. I mean, been just feeling the need to just think. And thinking has definitely been good for me. I think, also too, being outside in the weather with such weather extremes, I think I need a scarf. Like this is not a Portland, Oregon type of dusting or type of cold to where, you can conceivably go out and not have to worry about, really fast, really cold, sharp winds coming at your face. But like coming home today and then like looking at my face in the mirror and how it was like a red streak across my face, and also with my hat too. I got a nice winter hat, but it doesn't go down over my ears.
Right.
And if it's below, the 30s and whatnot, I think of Christmas Eve going into work and they'd happen to not tell me I didn't need to come in, so I hung out outside the front door of the place for a half hour in 18-degree weather, and that wasn't fun.
Oh, no. And I mean, at least, like, I'm glad. So our Christmas gift, the Mr. Reverend and I, for Tim the Nerd, is we got him some yak tracks, which is basically, like, tire cables for your shoes. And it's like, man, I bet when you go to work tonight, those gaiters are going to come in really handy. Because those things, if you don't know what those are and you live in places that have weather like this, it's just like a waterproof shell that you can put, like, it kind of covers your shin into the top of your shoe so you don't get like a bunch of snow or ice or rain in your shoes. So Merry Christmas, that's why we got them for you.
Nice.
Sorry, I guess we didn't think to get the whole set of like making sure your ears are covered and you've got a scarf, but we do have like some stuff that you can borrow tonight, by the way. Like just now that we're talking about it, if you need something to get to work tonight, let us know.
Yeah. And the yak trucks are definitely nice because I brought those. I had, going to work, there wasn't much snow. The snowfall that we're seeing right now was just starting as I was walking to work, but I knew it was going to be like this. So I did bring them to work and then put them on my shoes to walk home. And it really helps with traction more than anything else. I mean, if you got a couple feet of snow, the snow can help with the traction if you don't have something like the yak tracks. But if you're talking like black ice everywhere, oh, they were great.
Oh, nice. I'm glad they've been handy.
Yes, and also, apart from my introspection, Tim's Tremendous Tapes episode 2 is already out, and working on episode 3 right now. For episode 3, we are going to have a track from the recently departed David Crosby, from Crosby, Stills and Nash, who it was announced yesterday that he passed away. So we'll talk a little bit about him, and that's one reason why I love having another outlet like Tim's Tremendous Tapes. We'll be able to, celebrate his legacy by actually playing one of his songs. And if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to check out the new show. If you go to the Linktree link in our show description, you'll be able to find out where Tim's Tremendous Tapes is, as well as finding us on social media.
Indeed. To go ahead and follow along with us.
Indeed. Now, before we dive into our topic du jour today, part 2 on gun control, we got a couple little stories here of stories that we've talked about in the past that kind of tie in with it, and that was a loud crack of your neck.
Oh, sorry, guys. Yeah, my neck is stiff.
Apparently. But anyway, first of all, Alec Baldwin, it was announced that the New Mexico district attorney in the area where Alec Baldwin was filming his independent movie Rust, where they had an on-set tragedy of a prop gun accidentally going off and killing a person. Alec Baldwin is being charged with involuntary manslaughter, along with the weapons person on set. When the news first dropped, I believe it was back in 2021. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I strongly suspected that we would see something like this because one, Alec Baldwin has worked on enough, major Hollywood action type of films that it should have been common sense. Even if someone told him that the gun was clear and didn't have any bullets, you still check,
Well, but I thought the thing wasn't that it wasn't supposed to be unloaded. It was supposed to be loaded with a blank. Because it was supposed to be a fire being shot, quote unquote, but it was supposed to be a blank. So
but
we vaguely talked about it when it happened. I remember we had brought it up.
Well, you got to remember though, with a blank though, there's still stuff in a blank that at very short ranges. I mean, because there was an actor in the '80s. I forgot his name off the top of my head, but I know he did a show called Voyagers. It was like one season time travel show, but he was on set somewhere and then just saw a gun on there and just made a joke. I'm going to do something, and then pulled the trigger, and it was blank on the inside, but the little paper wad on the inside that they have on there broke his skull.
Yeah.
And he ended up dying. So it's still dangerous to, wield a weapon around not knowing what's in that chamber.
Correct. I guess I'm just a little fuzzy because it's been some time and I don't follow this, religiously. But I thought they were shooting the scene. I thought he was doing, so it wasn't between.
It was.
So was he really close range? I'm just curious, because to me it seems so odd that he would get blamed for something that technically would have been the job and somebody signing that it was their job to make sure. So I guess I could see it if he was goofing off and it was close range and it went off, where it would have caused damage anyway. So I guess that's where I'm like, wait, why is it his fault again?
But that ties into the second point, is the fact that he wasn't just an actor in this movie. He was the producer.
Right.
And the producer, for lack of a better term, in simplistic terms, is essentially kind of like the boss of the film. And as the boss, he's definitely liable for the good and the bad that happens. And if there was a lapse in protocol in terms of, or cost cutting when it comes to safety, that does fall into his lap.
True. I guess to me, because again, haven't read this, and this was an article that you'd pulled before today, it matters, is he being sued as the person who did it, or is he being sued as being liable because he was in charge of stuff?
These are criminal charges.
He's being charged. Okay, so see, I guess that's where I'm confused. I'm curious if it'll stick that way, or if it'll end up being, but it wasn't his job to load the gun, but as the producer, he does still have liability.
I don't know at this point what's going to happen. I mean, because I tried to predict the Johnny Depp trial, stating, Depp's going to lose, and look what happened there. So anything can happen. Also, there was another member of the Rust crew, I think it was the assistant director, who already copped a deal and is cooperating with the district attorney.
So they're just going after whoever they can sue then, probably. But, yeah.
I mean,
that's the unfortunate reality of our justice system. It's more of a money system.
But, if there were protocols on set, the people responsible should be held accountable for their actions because, due to their inaction, a human being died and, kids lost their mother, a guy lost his wife because people were not careful.
Right. So that's there's parts of it that make sense, but there's parts that don't. See, it's not funny, guys. I swear, this is just bad timing on my child. There's parts that make sense, and there's parts that don't. And so I'm not saying this is bullshit, let him go. I'm saying I'm curious how it's going to play out because there's a lot of it that is just so interesting situationally. That's not as clear cut as again, if you think it's on the set and you have no real reason to think live ammunition was in there. But at the same time, I also, as I talked in the last episode, and we'll probably talk more into this episode, I am a gun owner person, and you should always treat a gun like it's loaded with live ammo, always. Yeah. And I think it is because of that I will always struggle at the idea of having a real gun used in shooting something like that. I don't think I could ever actually get myself to point a gun at somebody knowing that it is a real gun. I don't care if they've told me what kind of ammunition is in it. So if anything, it could open that conversation of we need to respect guns, and maybe it's not that important to get the quote unquote accurate shot. Maybe it's okay to do it enough to interpretation so that people can be safe, and then definitely no fucking around between, shots, between scenes.
Well, also, too, I mean, the technology is there. There have been plenty of movies to where the gunfire you've seen did not happen on set. It happened in a computer. Mm-hmm. And that technology is there to make it look relatively realistic. You're not going to be like, oh, that's super fake, or anything like that. So it's yeah. To your point, this is the start of the process. Do I think the worst is going to happen and he's going to go to jail for a minimum of 5 years? I don't think so, but that's what this whole process is going to be about. We're going to find out more via the legal system on what happened on that film set, and then if it does go to trial, it'll be up to a jury to determine. I mean, more than likely, I would probably expect like a plea bargain to where he has like a big fine, has to do a bunch of community service or something like that, and like loses the chance to like film in New Mexico for X amount of years or something like that. I mean, I can see something like that happening. I would be shocked if he was going to jail, but there's one thing he didn't do that did not help him, that he did, which did not help himself, and that was the tell-all interview he did on ABC shortly after the thing happened, because in that interview he mentioned that he didn't pull the trigger. He pulled back the hammer on the gun, and it landed in the gun shop, but the district attorney who's starting the process to charge him said no, the trigger was pulled. So there's different stories going on. So that is developing. Also, the parents of the 6-year-old child in Virginia, the story we started off last week's show with, have come out with a statement. We'll have this link on the show description here, but The statement said a lot without saying anything, really, so I don't think we need to necessarily read it verbatim here. A lot of it, I think probably their lawyer probably came up with it, if anything, and, because... do you have the article up right now?
Oh, no, I do not.
Okay, let me bring it up here, but they came out with a statement, and it does sound like the teacher is actually back home now. Yes,
I had heard that she was doing better. I didn't realize that she was back home, but I did hear that she seemed to be on the recovery end of things. Like, she was officially like, hey, she's out of the woods and now she's recovering. 'Cause for a while there, they just didn't know how she was doing.
Yeah. Anyway, the family, one of the things they said is that the firearm their son accessed was secure. Which, come on.
Well, I mean, of course they're going to say that, because, again, that goes into neglectful handling of a firearm.
Which is a reason why, I think a lawyer came up with what they said. Like, also, our family has always been committed to responsible gun ownership and keeping firearms out of the reach of children, which obviously didn't work so well in this case. But they did mention that this kid, the 6-year-old in question, has disabilities, mental disabilities, and one of the parents have had to be in that classroom with him pretty much every day since he started school. The one day they don't show up, this happens.
Yeah.
So again, this is information that we know up to this particular date here. I'm sure as time goes on, there will be some more information that will be released to the public. But we're also talking about a 6-year-old kid, so it's not going to be like the Alec Baldwin thing where every piece of dirt is going to be dragged up and
exactly. And to me, my immediate question is like, okay, what is your definition of securing the gun then? Because obviously you fucked up. Mm-hmm. Like, I go back to, I don't see a 6-year-old, figuring out a combination. I mean, I guess there is an argument if there's a key, that would be the easiest one to get into. But I would still question if that's not going to fall under neglect there. Like, that really feels like a prepared statement from the lawyer.
Yeah.
Like, don't ever admit that you left this gun out because it was just out to be cleaned. Like, you know what I mean? So I'm super curious how this ends up panning out in the end.
Same here. I mean, because we're talking about a 6-year-old who did this, for goodness sake. I mean, it shouldn't occur when a 16-year-old does it, but having a 6-year-old do this is like a perfect reason to talk about gun control and gun control laws in this country. So we'll dive in here to part 2 of our discussion, going through the pros and cons on the ProCon website.
I get to be on the pros side this time, because it's like, this has been an elephant in the room for our country because it happens too often, and not just at schools, but it does seem to really shake us more when it happens at schools, and it still just makes me go, why have we made almost no changes then, right? So going back into some of these arguments, I'll just go ahead and dive in. So we're at pro number 6. Legally owned guns are frequently stolen and used by criminals. A June 2013 Institute of Medicine report states that, quote, almost all guns used in criminal acts enter circulation via initial legal transaction, end quote. Between 2005 and 2010, 1.4 million guns were stolen from U.S. homes during property crimes, including burglary and car theft, a yearly average of 232,400. Ian Aries maybe, JD, PhD, and John J. Donahue, who's also a PhD, professor of law at Yale.
John J. Donahue.
At Yale School and Stanford Law School, respectively, state, with guns being a product that can be easily carried away and quickly sold at a relatively high fraction of the initial cost, the presence of more guns can actually serve as a stimulus to burglary and theft. Even if the gun owner had a permit to carry a concealed weapon and would never use it in furtherance of a crime, it is likely that the same can be said for the burglar who steals a gun. Yeah, so that's a very valid point, right? Like, just because, and this would almost be a pro argument for banning, right? Because they're saying that even legally obtained guns, just the more that we have, the more likely it is somebody can get their hands on it. Like, that's period. That's anything. That is basically almost a cousin to supply and demand. But that also just makes me question, like, maybe everybody, like, instead of necessarily supporting a ban, it could also go into, well, maybe they should require licenses and certifications because it would just reduce how many people had them, right? So I could see this pro supporting a ban, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it also could support the idea of, like, you need special certifications, classes, like, prove that you can be responsible with this thing. Because that's one of the main reasons they discourage purse carrying. Like, in any female self-defense class, there's a lot of purses that are designed with harnesses in them, or holsters, I mean. But the problem with that is, well, if they've got your purse, they've got your gun. Mm-hmm. So even, like, kind of fine-tuning our understanding, our education, one of my favorite things that I like to bring up when people are like, but I have a right to own a gun. I was like, well, I mean, you having the right to do something doesn't necessarily mean it's easy to do it. You technically have the right to own a Bengal tiger, but you'd have to have certain licenses, and you'd have to do a lot of things and meet certain criteria for even keeping that animal. So, like, just because there is a right to do something does not mean right to free or easy access to that thing, though.
I get that. I mean, for me, the problem I'm having with this particular argument is, this idea that, criminals could steal the guns, so we must ban the guns, when, we're not necessarily asking, how the guns in question that were stolen were kept. I mean, because if they were in a proper gun safe, it's possible if the safe was small enough, the thief could, carry it out with them. I get that, but
right, like the little hand one, right? That you think of the small ones.
Yeah, I mean, if it's something like that, I get it. But if the owner is doing their due diligence by keeping it secured in a proper spot, even if it is stolen, that's just a matter of contacting the police and stating, hey, my gun's been stolen, blah blah blah. Right. Here's all the information, just so the police know. Now, the people would argue, well, criminals can take off the serial number, but yeah, if they arrest a criminal and the serial number's scratched off the gun, I believe that's an extra charge for them.
Oh, exactly. Like, that makes it worse, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people, like, I could also read this pro as, again, not necessarily a ban, but requirements. Mm-hmm. Go back to the tiger thing, just to be silly about it. You'd have to have a secure enclosure that is approved. That might mean that you have to have a large gun safe that the gun can go into. And of course, like, I feel like a lot of the more NRA proponents be like, well, what about house self-defense? Fine, give me numbers on how many humans have actually needed a gun to defend their home. Like, because I just don't feel like that's as common as it's made to sound when you get into these gun arguments of people who are pro common sense reform and anti. Like, I just don't think it's as prevalent as it maybe once upon a time was for somebody to, quote unquote, need a gun to defend their home.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, it depends on location. I mean, in the city, if you're poor or something like that, and you live in a bad neighborhood, like my son, my oldest, that's why he's getting a gun. He lives in a bad neighborhood, and not cross fingers, nothing's happened to him so far, and there's probably a strong likelihood that nothing would happen to him, but it's nice to be able to have that bit of protection there. Now, I mean, I wouldn't want to, penalize gun owners that are following the letter of the law and doing all the right things to keep that gun safe and secure. To me, banning in this particular argument would be punishing them more than anything. Right,
because this, to me, that's what I guess my problem with this pro is my initial reaction as I read it is a support for banning. Mm-hmm. And that is something... Like, I'll probably accidentally reiterate too much. I don't support banning. Not an outright ban. But when you take it into the context of it could actually be a good argument for, you need to have a safe that meets certain criteria. And as far as, like, if you're in a rough neighborhood, I mean, when I've had a gun safe in the past, it was kept in the bedroom. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to be broken in on while you're home, it's most likely going to be at night. And really, most breaking and entry happens during the middle of the day when they are assuming people are at work. So I know that statistic, like, I couldn't pull the actual factual numbers. I just know that's something I've read before, is if you were going to have somebody break and enter and burgle, it is more likely to happen in the middle of the day, not at night. But if something does happen at night and you're back in your room, I mean, that does give you opportunity, especially if you are concerned about that. Get something that uses a handprint or a thumbprint or something to unlock, and you would have easy access to a safely held loaded gun. Because, see, if it's behind that kind of measure, I wouldn't have any problem with it staying loaded if you're in a neighborhood where that makes sense to you and gives you comfort.
Yeah.
Now, my my ex-fiance used to keep a loaded gun, like, by his pillow. Like, it was literally tucked into the side of the bed. And I hated that. But that goes into, I really do think he had PTSD, combat-related PTSD to be very specific. And so I think that was more of a manifestation of that because we weren't living in a dangerous neighborhood. Like, so it goes back to, I do think if you are that concerned, there is maybe the therapy route to consider, especially when it doesn't really make logical sense to be that hyper-aware and hyper-concerned, because that goes into untreated PTSD, whether from combat or other, by the way.
Indeed. Well, let's go into the first con here, con number 6. Gun control laws give too much power to the government and may result in government tyranny and the government taking away all guns from citizens. You can tell how much I agree with this. And EJ wasn't kicking me, folks.
No.
57% of people surveyed by Pew Research in February 2013 said that gun control laws would give too much power to the government over the people. The NRA's Wayne LaPierre stated, if you look at why our founding fathers put the Second Amendment there, they had lived under the tyranny of King George, and they wanted to make sure that these free people in this new country would never be subjugated again and have to live under tyranny. Alex Jones, radio host, in a January 7th, 2013 interview with Piers Morgan, stated, the Second Amendment isn't there for duck hunting. It's there to protect us from tyrannical government and street thugs. 1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms. And if you're going to make an argument to support your side of the story, you don't quote Alex Jones, for one.
Yeah. I mean, granted, how old is this argument? Because some of these pro-cons have been up there for a while, right?
Well, they said 2013, and I remember this interview because I was pissed at Piers Morgan, because all Piers Morgan did is he got the most extreme person he could to do the pro-gun argument, and it made it seem like everybody that is pro-Second Amendment supports Alex Jones. guns. and no, I mean, because there are plenty of socialists out there. There are plenty of progressives out there who still support the right to own a gun, own weapons and whatnot for this reason. And to the argument's point, is it theoretically possible that the government could go south and we would need to overthrow the government? It's happened before. It could happen again.
And I think there would be signs that people who needed to form their militia to stand up to their government would kind of know to maybe take some certain actions before they came knocking on the door, right? Because I don't think they would preemptively do that here. I think it would be reactionary to something bigger going on.
It's just this argument from the very first on to the last word here is it could lead to this, it could lead to and no, like it's like they're spouting the worst case scenario here, a worst case scenario that theoretically could happen. I'm not saying it couldn't,
right?
But
I've even brought up the possibility of a civil war type thing and who those two parts would be between, and if the government would be involved in that or not. I can't say, because there are people who say it's unlikely, but not impossible at the same time. And just to preface what I was meaning earlier is I don't know how long ago this particular con was supported. Like, I know they dated the quote, but he has obviously kind of fallen out of grace with a lot of folks since 2013. It's kind of like the Mr. Reverend and I were watching a documentary the other day, and they were talking about Elon Musk in a very positive light. And we now know today, in today's world, he is losing respect by the minute, it seems.
Well, but that's the thing, though, with Alex Jones. I can safely say that Alex Jones at this particular time was still the no-good, dirty human being that he is now. It's just he wasn't actively involved in an insurrection at that particular time.
Right, exactly. I'm saying stuff has happened since 2013, and now that people who even still liked him in 2013 maybe don't anymore. So it feels like this one's a little dated, and like pulling the quote from him today is probably more harmful to this con than it was in 2013 when he said it.
Because more than anything, this particular con is it's biased. It's just not. Again, theoretically, could it happen? Yes, but common sense law. We're talking background checks here, people. Licensing. We're not talking about give us your entire lineage back 3 generations worth of information.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, to be fair, it could be said that both the pros and the cons are biased, but that's kind of the point of like going through them and talking about all of them is like, look at the other pro I talked about. I didn't fully agree, and that's soaked in bias too. So I mean, they're all biased. They're pros and cons.
She's throwing in Alex Jones to bash anyone.
Oh no, I just love that like more people like dislike him now. I didn't like him in 2013. I wouldn't have given a shit what he had to say about guns, but now more people give less of a shit, which is kind of joyful.
I think if anything too, when it comes to Alex Jones, I think people have now realized the importance of vetting the material that comes into their ears or eyes, and not being comfortable with the whole idea of, oh, he's good, he does some stuff that's just bad, but I like the other things that he does. You shouldn't support people like that.
Oh yeah, we actually saw a news article. There's actually misinformation literacy courses starting in certain places now. And a lot of that is because of, like, these last few years and in America land. Like, Finland was the one that came up. I just looked it up really quick. But they've started, like, kind of this little bit of a war against misinformation. And part of it is starting to include misinformation education in, like, earlier years, not just in vetting sources. Like, I feel like this already existed to a point. Like back in the day when you would write like reports and things, and they, for example, wouldn't accept Wikipedia for a long time there because it was a little bit more Wild West and not as moderated as now. But now it's like they're shifting it where there are actually classes focusing on misinformation as it pertains to like culturally. So I think that's like weird bright side. Like that's one thing I guess America has done is like highlighted this need. Wouldn't
it be weird though if like one of those classes they announced the wrong date for the class to start?
Just to teach a lesson in misinformation. So going on to pro number 7. Gun control laws would reduce the societal cost associated with gun violence. More than 100,000 people shot in the United States each year generate emergency room and hospital charges of nearly $3 billion. A study in the American Journal of Public Health estimated that hospitalizations for firearm-related injuries cost Medicaid and Medicare $2.7 billion over 9 years. A study in the American Journal of Public Health estimated that hospitalizations for firearm-related injuries cost Medicaid... Oh, I just accidentally reread that same thing. No. Okay, sorry. They put it twice. I'm not crazy. Okay. Anywho, it cost them $2.7 billion over 9 years. They really want to emphasize that, I guess. Or just that there's a second study that said the same thing, basically. But 84% of those injured by firearms are uninsured, leaving taxpayers responsible for most of those bills through programs like Medicaid. According to the World Health Organization, the costs of gun violence can include legal services, medical costs, perpetrator control, policing, incarceration, foster care, private security, lost earnings and time, life insurance, productivity, tourism, and psychological costs, pain and suffering, among others. Homicide rates doubling has been associated with 12.5% decline in property values. And so, that's interesting because I've come from the world of medical billing. I did ambulance billing. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is if any of that stuff happened to, say, somebody they couldn't identify and they did pass away, that's where that gets pushed off to, is to the taxpayer. That's who ends up paying those bills, essentially. You can't not pay the ambulance service for rendering service, so it kind of gets pushed as, well, this was done, for the society or whatever, and they're able to, get tax coverage that, ends up going to that. Yeah. So, man, I had never even thought about it that way before. Because these are even some of the arguments where they've made, safe places for people to use certain drugs. Because when you stack how much it ends up costing for the life-saving care, for sending an ambulance, dispatch and things like that, it costs a lot more money than giving them a place to quote-unquote safely use. Yeah. So it's kind of akin to that, anybody that is familiar with that argument, for why the war on drugs should kind of maybe taper down some. Because even keeping it secret and not having a safe place to do something can make it cost the culture more, in actual dollars.
And if there's anything that's going to speak to the American public, it is going to be dollars. Now,
unfortunately, that's how we roll here.
Yeah. The one thing to keep in mind is that, we will never, ever get to a day to where we will have just the right type of laws to make sure no accidental or intentional killings will take place.
Right.
It will still happen. However, the point here is that, when done right and with the right laws in place, we could potentially keep them out of the hands of the people that would end up of some people that would end up causing this. And I think the benefits outweigh the negatives, in my opinion, because what they're asking, people who want to purchase a firearm to get, and I think what people are recommending via common sense gun reform is not that big of an ask. It's it would be like someone who's buying Sudafed getting pissed off that they have to show their license to the pharmacist. It's do you want to be that person, or just accept the fact that there are other people that, with Sudafed and a bunch of other drugs all together are going to make something far, far worse. So in the grand scheme of things, it is better to have this in place because, again, it will save money.
Right. That's the taxpayer money. You want to know where some of it goes that can't go to schools? It's some of this shit. Mm-hmm. This is why.
Yeah. All right, let's go into con number 7 here, and that's gun control laws such as background checks and microstamping are an invasion of privacy. Ooh, sorry. My sarcasm level is up high today, folks. Background checks would require government databases that keep personal individual information on gun owners, including name, addresses, mental health history, criminal records, and more. The ACLU worried that Senator Harry Reid's 2013 proposed background check legislation, the bill failed 54-46, would have allowed the government to keep databases of gun purchases indefinitely, creating a worry that you're going to see searches of the databases and an expansion for purposes that were not intended when the information was collected. Microstamping similarly requires a database of gun owners and the codes their personal guns would stamp on cartridge cases. Senators Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and Ted Cruz, three stooges of the Republican Party, wrote that they would oppose any legislation that infringes on the American people's constitutional right to bear arms or on their ability to exercise this right without being subjected to government surveillance. And the way it's worded, it's worded in a biased way, obviously. And it's just, you do have to take into account that when you have a powerful organization like a government, whether it's local, state, or federal level, there could be corruption. So I think there should be a conversation about what information needs to be gained from these people and how long we have it on file. And I think that is a good conversation to have. So I'm trying to see kind of the benefits here. I think just blindly stating let the government take care of it is setting yourself up for problems further down the road. You do want to take into account, not only human error, but the fact that, look at the politicians in the past who have used like the IRS in a political way. I mean, Richard Nixon did it, Trump did it, I'm sure other presidents have did it as well in terms of using the IRS to like audit their political enemies or something like that. Imagine if, you did have gun records that were kept indefinitely, how that could end up causing some problems for people. So I think this is a legitimate conversation to have to find out what is going to be the sweet spot to where we can get these background checks, because the information they're looking for is not bad at all. But on the other side, I do agree that, if I bought a gun once and then sold it and never owned a gun again, does the government still need to have my information on record?
Correct. Maybe there is a number of years, HIPAA requires medical records to be kept for 7 years. Mm-hmm. But maybe there is something that's hey, once that gun has been sold after X number of years, because nowadays we have so many things that automate file retention that I see no reason to not be able to set some of those. So, yeah, do I drink this one down and say, we should do it? No, but I agree with you. I think it should open the conversation of the best way to handle that information.
Yeah. So look at that. I supported a con. Yay.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that actually still drives me nuts to this day is I had bought a gun in Arizona. And one of the guns that I had, it was a little SIG, a SIG that I had. And when me and the gentleman that I was with at the time split, because it's fucking Arizona, I found out he just met some dude in a parking lot and sold my gun. My gun. And see, those are the things that I'm that shouldn't have been able to happen, but it did.
Yeah. And
secondly, now if I do have that gun registered, do they even know that I sold it because of how it was sold? So if that got for a long time, I was oh my God, if that gun is involved in anything, are they going to come knocking on my door? I was so mad at him for doing that. And not even because that's my shit and you stole it, but you sold it, you didn't ask me and you sold my shit. Really more of just that liability issue because I didn't know what would happen if something popped and that gun did get used.
I mean, at that point, even though it was a partner you were with at the time, that would be something to where you would almost by default have to contact the police and be and they're not emergency line. I'm not saying call 911, but be
right.
Hey, I was living with someone, they sold my gun,
He was able to, though. That's at the time in Arizona, he didn't do anything wrong. I had no case.
But that's the thing, though. What I'm not talking about in terms of, trying to get him charged or anything. Yeah, but, if they have an interaction with the public, they do have to write it down and keep it for records.
I guess I could have done that in that sense, but it's I don't know how much they would have cared. You know what I mean?
Probably not.
Because, you just told us that so-and-so was just walking across the street from you. Doing something perfectly legal at the time. So
yeah.
I felt I didn't know what to do because I knew what he did was totally legal.
Yeah.
So pro number 8, majority of adults, including gun owners, support common sense gun control such as background checks, bans on assault weapons, and bans on high-capacity magazines. According to a February 20th, 2018 Quinnipiac poll? I've never heard of that one before. 97% of American voters and 97% of gun owners support universal background checks. 67% support a nationwide ban on assault weapons. And 83% support mandatory waiting periods for gun purchases. As much as 40% of all gun sales are undocumented private party gun sales that do not require a background check, aka the gun show loophole, which is, by the way, that's how he was able to kind of, it wasn't the gun show loophole, which was a big thing in Arizona and may very well still be. But yeah, that's basically the private party gun sale was how he got away with doing that. 53% of all adults surveyed approved of high-capacity magazine bans. 89% of adults with a gun in the home approved of laws to prevent the purchase of guns by the mentally ill. And 82% approve of banning gun sales to people of no-fly lists. 77% of Americans support requiring a license to purchase a gun. That's a big one for me. Don McCallady, member of Hunters Against Gun Violence, stated, quote, "As a hunter and somebody who has owned guns since I was a young boy, I believe that common sense gun legislation makes us all safer. Background checks prevent criminals and other dangerous people from getting guns." So, like, I mostly agree with this. I go back to, the ban on assault weapons is something that I don't see myself ever fully agreeing with, right? Because it goes back to, I appreciate it as a hobby. Now, if you want to require jumping through some hoops and certification to get those kind of weapons because you want to be a hobbyist, I understand that. And that even goes back to my silly analogy of if I want to own a tiger, I understand there are things I've got to do, criteria I've got to meet, like, I could definitely see, like, requiring a gun safe.
Or, like, fly a plane. Think about
some of this stuff. Like, if you want to own a plane, you can't just go fucking buy a plane. Like, you have to...
Well, I'm sure you could, but the flying part, you would not be able to legally do that unless you did, take the training. And
like, you can't just buy it and then fly it and it's yours, so you could just use it however you want. Like, you have to do certain things. To not endanger other people is kind of the thing to underline there, right? Like, I don't have a problem with the hobbyists who want to own an AK. I have a problem with how easy it is for anybody to get one, right? So that's where I would say, like, more just restricting but not banning is still where I think I'm going to sit on that one. But then we go into the high capacity magazines. I definitely agree with that one. Background checks, and I've even mentioned this before that I know, that I've read stuff similar to this before to say that I knew, that most gun owners do support common sense gun reform.
Yes, it is not what you see on TV, folks. It's not on what you see in the news. It's not that, Second Amendment people are just, all advocating for the ability to just go anywhere, buy a gun without any sort of background check or anything like that. Most people are, I think, as the numbers clearly show, a strong majority of people agree on the basic common sense stuff that still is not getting through Congress.
It's being fought because the NRA has the whole, what's the term? The
money.
Well, the money.
Russian assets.
Not unions. I'm thinking about politically speaking.
Lobbyists.
Lobbyists, thank you, because the NRA has their own lobbyists. So, yeah, there we go. They want to make sales, basically.
Indeed. All right, let's dive into the next con here. Con number 8. More gun control is unnecessary because relatively few people are killed by guns. According to the CDC's leading causes of death reports, you should see their swimsuit issue. No, I'm kidding. Between 1999 and 2013, Americans were 21.5 times more likely to die of heart disease, 18.7 times more likely to die of malignant tumors, and 2.4 times more likely to die of diabetes, or 2.3 times more likely to die of Alzheimer's than to die from a firearm, whether by accident, homicide, or suicide. The flu and related pneumonia
numbers of deaths.
Numbers of deaths were more than gun deaths. Traffic deaths and poisoning, whether via accident, homicide, or suicide, all killed more people between 1999 and 2013 than firearms. Firearms were the 12th leading cause of deaths for all deaths between 1999 and 2013, responsible for 1.3% of deaths, with 464,033 deaths. Internationally, the claim that the United States has a major problem with firearm homicide is exaggerated. The United States is ranked 28 in international homicide death rates with 2.97 gun murders per 100,000 people in 2012, and they're not getting it.
I just think it's really funny because when I think about like the standard person that supports all the gun rights is also the same person that bitches because they want to put taxes on soda because we found how unhealthy soda is, right? So it's like, so hold up. Your main argument is that as long as metabolic diseases are killing us more than guns should be okay. When really, I mean, that's something I even have my totally separate and humble opinions on, is the terrible diet in America land and how that is being pushed on people, and how like the McDonald's kids meal being created essentially made like a sustainable way for them to get more users of their product and like perpetuate all of this diet that is like heart disease, like, and even malignant tumors. They're starting to relate some of the cancers to diet, like being a little bit more metabolic.
But they're, you know, comparing apples to pomegranates here. I mean, they're not making a realistic argument because, well, it's like, you know, thing B happens, so thing A you shouldn't mess with because
something is worse. Yeah, something is worse, and it makes this look not as bad, so this thing should be okay.
I mean, I think one argument you can have, though, is, you know, we've talked about it before, programming. Because a lot of what people get excited and riled up about when it comes to news reports, because of cable news, because of the information being so widely available via the internet now, is that stories do tend to get blown up that may not have necessarily been blown up in the past.
Right.
And that, you know, with the media kind of controlling the narrative, that can lead to people thinking it's a much bigger situation than it actually is. Like, take a look at Jaws. Jaws, the movie, made people more scared of sharks than they really need to be.
Right.
And that ended up, killing, that ended up leading to the deaths of a lot of sharks too, because people were, scared that, it happened in a movie. Well, it could happen to me. Theoretically, sure, it could potentially happen to you, but the chances are better of you getting hit by lightning than getting bitten by a shark.
Right. It's even led where I think some of these scuba divers that go out and have like these cool interactions with sharks, like, are sharing it because they're trying to show like that's not really the most common behavior of a shark. They don't like hunting humans. That is not their preferred food. Yeah. But you're right. Like some of that stuff that just kind of perpetuates that stuff. But it just, I don't know. I couldn't help but giggle at some of the metabolic disease kills us more. So we shouldn't make guns illegal, and we also shouldn't do anything about the metabolic diseases that are killing people.
Because they will have numbers that this is worse than metabolic, so we don't have to do anything about the metabolic.
Right. Basically, so that's people's choices. All right, so pro number 9.
Pro number 9.
More gun control leads to fewer suicides. Between 1999 and 2013, there were 270,237 firearm suicides in the United States. That's actually something I talked about at the front of our prior episode, which accounts for about 52% of all suicides during those years. When U.S. gun ownership goes down, overall suicide rate drops. Meanwhile, each 10% point increase in gun ownership is linked to a 26.9% increase in the youth suicide rate. So keep in mind, youths can't buy guns, so this would be their parents owning them, right? Mm-hmm. Female first-time firearm owners were 35 times more likely to commit suicide within 12 years of buying the gun compared to women who did not own guns. Male first-time firearm owners were about 8 times more likely to do so. Firearm-related suicides accounted for 61% of the gun deaths in the United States between 2000 and 2010. Researchers found that a general barrier to firearm access created through state regulation can have a significant deterrent effect on male suicide rates in the U.S. Permit requirements and bans on sales to minors were the most effective of the regulations analyzed. In Indiana and Connecticut, after, quote, red flag laws were removed from people who may pose a threat, were enacted, gun suicides decreased by 7.5% and 13.7% respectively, while suicides by other means did not increase during the same time. or did not decrease during the same time. A person who wants to kill him or herself is unlikely to commit suicide with poison or a knife when a gun is available. So, yeah, like, what's funny is, like, kind of the counter argument to this, but again, it would be different if the pro-gun people supported things like this, would be better access to mental health care, right? Like, let's be fair about that, because that was some of my critique I had with the article that I shared at the front of the other show. I do not want to demonize the mentally ill at all. But one of the points that I had made, if you didn't hear that, was I do kind of think that it's kind of a weird game to play on it, because we also don't have good access to mental health care. So, yeah, I do think it still contributes to gun violence, both suicide and the type of person who would be so angry to justify hurting other people, which I still personally believe falls under a mental illness umbrella there. It's just extremely ironic and hypocritical to me that the same people who say everybody should be allowed to have guns if they want them are the same people who say, yeah, but access to health care, which would include mental health care, is a no-no. Like, that's their responsibility. Like, so it drives me nuts, some of these things that talks about mental health as it does relate to gun control.
But overall, I do agree with it. I mean, because, like, I know the times to where I've dealt with suicide, it wasn't suicide attempts. It wasn't a situation to where I planned it for 6 months. You know, it's like it was depressed, and then I want to do it, and I need to do it now. And, you know, if people do have easier access to get a gun, I mean, I think it's been shown that, you know, that's probably the most effective way to off yourself. That's not something we're saying do at all, folks, but just
no. Well, I mean, it's at least considered the more effective and whatever.
I think
there are failures. I know of other stories that have been sad failures. I know of a story that somebody knows this person personally who blinded themselves through a failed attempt, and it unfortunately was a dual agreement. So they failed, but heard the other person do theirs, and theirs succeeded. Who knows? We should put like a trigger warning at the beginning of this episode, not ironically, because, well, I mean, we didn't know for sure how much suicide would come up in some of this discussion, but I know that's something that's very triggering for some people to hear about. Mm-hmm. Literally, no pun intended that this is gun control. Triggering is just the term. But yeah, like, but unfortunately, it is considered a fast and effective and quote-unquote most painless way to get it done. So as long as that's the case, like, that's where those red flag, laws come in handy.
Or just
that's
a waiting period.
Yeah, the waiting period was the second thing I was going to say, too, is, like, having a waiting period. Because it is basically a crime of passion against yourself. Like, I know we talked about our attempts in a prior episode where we actually focused on suicide. Like, I didn't plan that days in advance. Like, that was just, it was a crime of passion against myself is the best way that, I could describe it. It failed, obviously, spoiler alert. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so that's another one where I could see, like, the waiting periods. Obviously, this doesn't really help with the ban on assault rifles. Most people aren't going to use one of those for this purpose. But, it does support a lot of the other things that common sense gun control proponents, like, do want to see.
Indeed. But let's go to the next con here. Con number 9, gun control laws and lower gun ownership rates do not prevent suicides. And I think it's interesting how they worded that, and I'll get into it when I read it here. Lithuania has one of the world's lowest gun ownership rates, 0.7 guns per 100 people, but its suicide rate by any method was 45.06 per 100,000 people in 1999, the highest suicide rate among 71 countries with available information. Japan has a low gun ownership rate at 0.6 guns per 100 people and a high suicide rate of 18.41 suicides per 100,000 people in 1997, ranking it 11 out of 71 countries. South Korea has a low gun ownership rate, but 1.1 guns per 100 people, but has a high rate of suicide and the highest rate of gun suicides, 12.63 per 100,000 people in 1997. By contrast, the United States has the 26th highest suicide rate, 12.3 suicides per 100,000 people in 2011, and the highest gun ownership rate, 88.8 guns per 100 people. Jim Barrett, author for thetruthaboutguns.com, stated the theory that the restriction or elimination of guns would have a positive effect on the overall suicide rate in the U.S. does not hold up under scrutiny. Like, the mental gymnastics here. I mean, what people that want common sense gun reform want is to prevent as many suicides as they can. It's not to stop all suicides. That is ridiculous because, yes, if guns were completely done away with the snap of a finger like Thanos, people would find other ways. There are other ways. I mean, bridges, buildings, being married.
Well, the other argument to that, too, like that this kind of like comes up next to is, taking away guns isn't going to stop somebody who really wants to be violent and hurt somebody, right? It just takes away one of the methods of doing it. So, yeah, it feels like very akin to that argument of this is talking about self-harm, but I've heard kind of the same sort of vibe go out there for harm against others. Like, if they really want to do it, they're going to find a way. And I'm like, but that doesn't mean here's a tool. Go ahead and have access to it. And this goes back to waiting periods. I mean, it would at least stop the crime of passion ones, which I'm sure there are a lot of them.
Well, and to your point too, I mean, nowhere do you see any sort of, talk by those people that, are the hardcore Kool-Aid drinking, Second Amendment, NRA supporting types of, let's have a definitive plan in place for proper mental health care for the country because, the NRA is usually the first to talk about mental health stuff when it comes to mass shootings that are out there. But do you hear them, do you hear stories about their lobbyists contacting politicians about, putting like special mental health programs in place for people? No.
No.
It's just to protect, the gun makers. I mean, because the NRA is primarily just the gun makers.
Right.
Yeah.
But that's who, again, it goes into the lobbyists follow the money on that one. They want to be able to make their sales. Mm-hmm. And they don't exactly support, like, even, say that they could make a program that made mental health care somehow public access. They're not supporting that either. Mm-hmm. So that's where it's like I take a lot of anything they have to say on mental health with a huge grain of salt because they don't actually seem to care about mental health. They just like to use it as don't give the mentally ill guns. And even then, they don't even really support any of the background checks that would be required to not give the mentally ill people guns. And so I think it comes down to sales. And
yeah, I mean, and as the arguments here show from the, pro-Second Amendment side, they are willing to use certain arguments in regards to mental health if they feel it bolsters their argument. And if there are things about mental health that don't bolster their argument, then it's bad. Right.
And that's where I really kind of, it annoys me anytime they bring up mental health, like in their, anti-gun reform stuff, because don't act like you care about something when you obviously don't. You only care about it when bringing it up supports any of your bias, any of your opinions.
Yep.
But so pro number 10, so the last pro-con for this riveting episode. Enacting gun control laws such as mandatory safety features would reduce the number of accidental gun deaths. Approximately 50% of unintentional fatal shootings were self-inflicted, and most unintentional firearm deaths were caused by friends or family members. According to the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence and the National Physicians Alliance, states with the highest concentration of guns have 9 times the amount of accidental gun deaths, and, quote, 89% of unintentional shooting deaths of children occur in the home, and most of these deaths occur when children are playing with a loaded gun in their parents' absence. The U.S. General Accountability Office estimated that 31% of accidental shooting deaths could have been prevented by installing safety devices on guns. 100% of deaths per year in which a child under 6 years old shoots and kills him or herself or another child could be prevented by automatic child-proof safety locks. And 23% of accidental shooting deaths by adolescents and adults per year could be prevented by loading indicators showing when a bullet was in the chamber ready to be fired. Marjorie Sanfilippo, PhD, professor of psychology at Eckerd College, who has researched children's behavior around guns, stated, quote, "We put gates around swimming pools to keep children from drowning. We put safety caps on medication and keep children from poisoning themselves. Because children are naturally curious and impulsive, and because we have shown time and again that we cannot, quote, gun-proof them with education, we have a responsibility to keep guns out of the hands of children." And that even also goes to, like, it makes me think of the situation that I brought up last episode where my master sensei was unintentionally shot by his wife, and it was a known hair trigger situation. It's like, I wonder how that could actually play out, though, because there's already so many out there. Mm-hmm. Like, are we going to require inspections on guns like we do our cars?
Why not, though? I mean, if licensing works with guns the same it does with vehicles, I assume, like every few years you got to go back in to renew it anyway. So why not have it to where you have to bring your weapon in for an inspection to make sure it's, still functioning the way it should be, or if it is more for just an ornament that, you take something out of the gun that would, make it ineffective and just a showpiece.
Well, I mean, possibly, but I could even see there being exceptions for certain guns, like historical pieces, for example, because you look at, like, those inspection laws don't apply to vehicles that are show vehicles, for example, but the vehicle's still allowed to run. Like, you're allowed to drive it X number of miles a year. This was just something I learned because in Arizona, there are a lot of car shows because of how dry it is there. So it's better to keep cars there. So that's why it's like... something in steel or something like that was a big car show that used to like come through there, and there was a few that would. So there's different different registrations you can get, I think is the right term. But basically you can't do more than X number of miles a year or whatever. So, I mean, I could see protecting a historical piece. I don't think that should necessitate like sterilizing it, like basically making it non-functioning. I don't think that's really cool either, because then you're basically really depreciating the value of a historic piece that still works.
Fair enough.
But would that like necessitate definitely needing to have a gun safe for that gun? Oh, absolutely, right? Because it doesn't have the safety measures. And even then, like, kind of it makes me think of like how I really respected the HK P7M8 because it did have a built-in safety. Like, not just a finger switch. You had to have the dexterity to squeeze this part of the handle and then squeeze the trigger.
Oh, that's the thing too. When it comes to like the safety features that they're talking about here, because they mention medications, like a lot of the child-proof things on medications. I think they brought it up on Adam Ruins Everything. It's security theater.
Yeah.
It's not really, it's protecting you from something that had already happened, and not necessarily something that really needs to be in place to protect you going forward, and to that point, if there were excessive, quote unquote safety features that the government was asking you to put on your device that would make usage of it a lot more difficult than it needed to be, I can see where there's an argument there. But if we're talking, like, I mean, some of the safety features they mentioned here, like the child safety locks, if you can explain to me why that would be an imposition and give me logical reasons, I guess I can let that slide, but that doesn't seem unreasonable, especially if you have kids.
That goes back to anybody who wants to glam onto the argument of self-defense, of home defense particularly, right? That, well, I shouldn't need to, like, do a combination lock. If it's in the safe, what good is it going to do me? Like, those are the arguments that I feel like I have heard most of my life, is people who are anti-safety regulations on guns, anti-requiring to keep them in a safe, right? So, I mean, and that to me could even go where I could understand if it's situational. If you've got kids in your home, you absolutely have to have security devices. But I don't think we police it the same. Like, she gave the example of the gates on pools and the medicine stops. But here's the thing. Being a prior pharmacy tech, and I'm pretty sure you can still do this, you can ask them for the non-safety top. They're not going to ask you if you've got kids. There's nothing that actually, like, mandates that you have to have those things. So that would be the difference where I don't agree with the parallel they're trying to make here. Like, yes, sure, those things exist, so do safety mechanisms for guns. They already exist. So you're arguing something that does exist in other contexts with something that also does exist under this context, but none of those things are enforced by law to have to be done.
Yeah.
And that's where this particular pro gets me a little bit, right? Because, yeah, they're not comparing an equal thing by bringing up the gates and the medication lids. But if it were required, like for, say, if there was a law saying if you've got children, you get a medication and you knowingly switch from a safety cap to a flat cap, and that child then ingests that medication, that there could be a charge of neglect against you for that.
Yeah.
That would be different. If you had a pool and no safety mechanisms and that child then drowns in that pool, could you be charged for neglect against that? I don't believe we have hard and fast laws for those two things that would make it that clear. So unless we're willing to do it for all of the things, I actually have to say here's a pro that I'm a little bit against, because it doesn't fully make sense unless we're going to do it for all the things.
Yeah, I mean, because, swimming and having a weapon are two different things.
Right.
And it's not, I mean, to be clear, I get the idea that she's trying to push out there.
Yeah.
But to your point, the examples that she's using are are not the best, because I think people that, naturally tend to, pro Second Amendment, rah type of deal are going to glam onto this and, probably come to the same conclusion you did. It's like she's comparing apples and pomegranates here, so why should I listen to her?
Right, unless they're actually going to, do something that's like an enforcement, like you have to prove you don't have children in the home in order to not get the safety mechanism on the pills. You have to prove there's no children in the home to not get a safety gate on your pool. Mm-hmm. Like, that would be different, but that's not the world we live in right now. And the way that this reads to me is that they have an expectation that all firearms should have these things. Meanwhile, all pools don't need to have that thing. All medication don't need to have that thing.
Indeed. Now, one thing that the gun supporters would endorse here is con number 10. More gun control is not needed. Education about guns and gun safety is needed to prevent accidental gun deaths.
God.
95% of all U.S. gun owners believe that children should learn about gun safety. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. And people need more gun education and mental illness screening to prevent massacres. The Sporting Arms and Ammunition Manufacturers Institute, Inc., stated, whether in the field, at the range, or in the home, a responsible and knowledgeable gun owner is rarely involved in a firearms accident of any kind. Heidi Cifelli, former program manager of the NRA's Eddie Eagle gun safe programs, stated, gun education is the best way to save young lives. The NRA states that the Eddie Eagle program is not meant to teach whether guns are good or bad, but rather to promote the protection and safety of children, like swimming pools, electrical outlets, matchbooks, and household poison. They're guns, treated simply as a fact of everyday life. According to Kyle Winterstein, managing editor of Guns and Ammo, studies show that children taught about firearms and their legitimate uses by family members have much lower rates of delinquency than children in households without guns. And children introduced to guns associate them with freedom, security, and recreation, not violence. This is a con, believe it or not, I agree with a lot of what they said. I do think gun education is definitely important, even for people that don't, own a weapon. I think the more knowledgeable people get about guns, the better decisions they're going to make, and whether it be in the ballot box or if they're shopping for a gun. However, this whole argument screams to me the same type of argument you get from people that want to talk about abstinence. It's like abstinence when it comes to teenagers is a perfectly valid thing to teach, and ideally is what teenagers should practice during their teenage years, not focusing on that as much as focusing on making sure they're doing good in school, blah blah blah. But we know teenagers. Teenagers will find a way to, do what they're going to do. And, only focusing on abstinence is doing them an ultimate disservice. So
right.
I say, yes to gun education. I think if people learn the ins and outs of gun safety, blah blah blah, then any sort of boogeyman idea that people have about it would be out the window because the knowledge is there. But that can't be the only thing in place.
Right. And it's funny that this is like one of their cons when you've got states like Arizona, who, while I was there, I don't remember the exact year, I lived there from 2009 until 2015, but at some point there, they removed the requirement to get a conceal carry permit in order to conceal carry as long as you're over the age of 21. So if you're saying that you need education, well, why are there places taking away the requirement for education? And that, again, was something I brought up, like, that bugged me on the last episode, was hearing somebody say, next person tries to steal my car. I was like, well, enjoy your time in prison. Because you can't do that. And the fact that somebody casually thinks that that's acceptable information or acceptable to do, like, to me, like, I'm very curious. I haven't looked into it now. I'm kind of wishing I have, and maybe I will before the next show. I'm curious if there's been more incidents in Arizona since they passed that. So maybe I'll try to find the year that they did that and see if there's anything going on, because now it's been a number of years since then. It's been, almost 10 since I've moved from there. So we'll have to see, like, what that panned out to do. Did taking away the education from adults harm? Did it do nothing? I don't see it helping. So, I could be wrong. I'd have to look into it, though.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, saying that education is great, but then taking away the requirements of education makes me question how strongly they feel about that.
Yeah, it sounds like, too, with the 80 Eagle stuff, they stuff like that just screams of, like, the propaganda videos you'll see from companies about, hey, we treat the environment great, even though there are stories about companies, the same company, like putting lots of chemicals in the ocean or something like that. So, like I said, there is nothing wrong with education. I do think when it comes to guns, especially because of our culture being what it is, knowledge about guns and how they work, I think, would dispel a lot of myths and, make it to where people, whether they want to own a gun or not, would have the proper information to be able to base, how they want to live their life. But that can't be the only route.
Right.
And anyway, I think that we'll wrap us up here for this week. We're over an hour and 20 minutes.
We mentioned these might be longer episodes because we knew there were a lot of pro cons. We do have one more set of 5 that we want to do next week, and then we will put this topic to bed.
Yeah, put a bullet between the eyes of Gold Yeller.
Oh, gosh. Poor Gold Yeller.
Anyway, I think that we'll wrap it up. Anything you want to say to our lovely audience before we wrap up?
Oh, no, not today. I think we've spoken enough.
Yeah, please stop. No.
It's like, please shut up, guys. I want this episode to end so I can go on to my other 30 podcasts I listen to.
Indeed. Well, thank you all for listening. Remember to check out Tim's Tremendous Tapes on Thursday, only on Spotify. If you've not checked it out yet, go to our Linktree link in the show description, and it will take you to where you need to go. Each Saturday, we will have something in this podcast space to entertain your ear holes. Until we meet again, we bid you adieu.
Goodbye, everybody.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.